Well, welcome everybody to this event. We're really delighted that we could all be together here in this room. I'm Paola Bacchetta. I'm a professor and the chair of the Department of Gender and Women's Studies, and here at UC Berkeley, in the next building actually. And I have the honor and the pleasure of moderating this event. So I first will say a number of thank yous. We're very grateful to a number of units and people who brought this together, who came together as a community so that we could put on 3 days of incredible programming, and we're very grateful. So the event was organized by the Departments of African American and Gender and Women's Studies at UC Berkeley, and by Adrienne Torf, Raymond O. Caldwell, the Fountain Theater of Los Angeles, Professor Nikki Jones, who's right here. Adrienne's also over here. So thank you, folks. It's been a very beautiful experience to work together with you all and others on this programming. So we thank our generous partners and co-sponsors at the Arts Research Center for letting us use this lovely space, and our partners at Berkeley AV for managing the tech and recording today. We thank our many co-sponsors who helped fund this programming, including J.T. Mason, the American Culture Center, Solmaz Sharif. Okay. Wonderful. And yeah, keep the love coming. And then the Social Sciences Dean's Office, that is Dean Rakare, who's wonderful. The Department of Geography, the Center for Race and Gender, the Center for the Study of Sexual Cultures, the Department of Comparative Literature, the Department of Ethnic Studies, the college writing programs, UCB Night Out, Night Off for graduate students, and the Division of Equity and Inclusion. Thank you all. We thank our co-sponsors who spread the word about the programming, including the Department of Theater and Performance Studies, the Gender Equity Resource Center, and the Center for Research on Social Change. And I want to mention this event would not be possible without the support of our amazing staff. So thank you to Barbara Montano of African American Studies, who's back there. And thank you to Jillian Edgelow of Gender and Women's Studies, who's right here. Since this is really the last of 3 events, I really want to thank everybody who came to all the events and made it happen. I want to also thank everybody who's here, and I think if you look around the room, it's very moving to see the kind of community that we made together. Thanks to June Jordan, a brilliant soul who always brought the right kind of people together. And she was, of course, deeply concerned with questions of solidarity, questions of love. And so I'm really glad that we came together in this place, because this is the place that's like living room. And as we all know from one of her poems, Moving Towards Home, living room is a kind of a metaphor for a future space that we're kind of moving towards and creating together. So I feel like we're creating living room here, or room to live, actually, especially since we are unfortunately living under brutal fascism. And so it's really great to be here in community with all of you in what we can create together as living room. So now I would like to introduce today's illustrious speakers that we're very proud and happy to have with us, and grateful as well. So Junichi P. Semitsu served as Director of Poetry for the People program at UC Berkeley from 2001 to 2005. In 2001, June asked Junichi to direct the program, and while teaching at Berkeley, he also taught other courses in both law, the law school, and in the Department of African American Studies, and currently serves as Deputy Attorney General in California's Department of Justice. Woo! And loves shoes. That's what I learned tonight. Me too. I love the shoes that you're wearing. The next speaker will be Marcos Ramírez, who was with Poetry for the People for over 15 years, and in that capacity, mentored many students to be poets, teachers, various professionals across the spectrum. His poems have been anthologized and published both online and in print. Thank you for being here. Xochiquetzal Candelaria is the author of 2 books of poetry. One is called Empire, another Show Me the Bells. Her work has appeared in The Nation, Tin House, Colorado Review, and other journals. The recipient of awards including NEA Fellowship in Poetry. She teaches writing at City College of San Francisco. Thank you for being here. Next, we have our very own Aya de Leon, who is the Poet Laureate of Berkeley and teaches creative writing at UC Berkeley. Aya has published 11 novels, many award-winning, and has appeared in the New York Times by the book. She has been an artist in residence at Stanford, a Cave Canem Poetry Fellow, and a Slam Poetry Champion. As a political organizer, she works with the Movement for Black Lives, the Working Families Party, and the Black Organizing Project in Oakland. Thank you for being here. So now just a few words about how we will proceed. First, each speaker will share their perspective on Poetry for the People and what it's meant to them, and that will be for about 8 minutes, please, so that we can, get to the rest. And after each has spoken, each will speak for about 5 minutes on the future of Poetry for the People. After that, we'll open it up to the audience and for your comments, your questions, whatever, about how we might envisage the future of this program. And while we're having the audience discussion, we're going to have a QR code, and you can all write a few sentences or a few words up there on the QR code of what you feel that Poetry for the People's future might be. So thank you very much, and please join me in welcoming our first speaker.
Hi, everyone. I am having a complete out-of-body experience at this moment because there are people who are dear to me that I have not seen in decades. And so, and first of all, when I taught here, I taught right over there, but this building wasn't here. So it's like a whole Twilight Zone thing because I'm seeing Meg Glasson and it's annoying me to no end that she looks the same as she did 20 years ago, but I'm like slowly decrepit. And so I walked in and they were showing a video of a reading where I was wearing a top hat and I don't remember ever wearing a top hat. I went into the bathroom there and they have the urinals covered and I'm like, I don't know how people in this civilization urinate here. Like, what do I do with these urinals? And I then realized you're not supposed to use those urinals. Okay. Anyway, I apologize. That's not the greatest intro. I'm just gonna, when I was a Berkeley undergrad, I took a class called The Power of Music and Words in the Theater with Adrienne Torf and June Jordan. And I took that class because I thought to myself, well, I play piano, so maybe I can make use of that skill. And at the end of that class, my recollection, and Adrienne can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say that June and Adrienne both came up to me and were like, so next semester, you are going to be in Poetry for the People, and you are going to be in the student teacher poet class that is normally reserved for people who have already taken the big class and then come over, but we're just going to shoehorn you in there, and that is what you're going to do. And I don't recall having a choice. I think I just did it. And that first semester, and keep in mind, I'd never written any poetry before. Like, the poetry I'd read up to that point was basically Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss. And then we were suddenly doing these outreach programs, as June did. June did Poetry for the People programs, not just here at UC Berkeley, but at Dublin Women's Prison, Berkeley High School, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, San Quentin, and Glide Memorial Church, which is where I went to. And so suddenly, I was like, on my very first time there, I was tasked with facilitating a group of people who were all older than me. For those who are not familiar with Glide Memorial Church, it's in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. It was run by Reverend Cecil Williams and Janice Murikitani. Many of the people in my group were survivors of domestic abuse. They were drug addicts. There were people who were homeless. They were all older than me. And I was like, I have no business facilitating this group, much less their poetry. It did not feel right to me at all. And I was like, what am I doing? What I remember most, though, is that there was an older gentleman who, and everybody at Glide, they kind of knew each other a little bit. They showed up to community programs together. But this one gentleman kind of seemed to be not quite connected to everybody, didn't quite know what his deal was. He was rather quiet. And when he brought in a poem, it was called Blue. And the whole thing was talking about this abstract concept of blue and how it haunted him, or something like that, right? And the guidelines say, like, all right, you want to start off with positive feedback first. And we're like, well, I like that, there are some strong images there, but then eventually when we got to the constructive part, everyone was like, I don't know what's happening here. The next time, he came back with a revision of the poem, and my memory is not great, but the way I remember it anyway is that he came back and said, I was raped by my father, and whenever I see blue, I am haunted by that, and it scars me. And we got the impression that he had never really shared that before. And then it came to sort of applying the guidelines, right? Like I was not mature enough and trained to really handle that. All I knew were these guidelines. The guidelines focused on telling the truth, and that's what sort of led us to that first thing. We focused on active voice. We focused on word choice. We focused on maximal impact, minimal words. And then at the reading, and again, I'm not quoting verbatim, so I apologize, but the way that I remember it is that at the reading, he said, my father envelops his hand around my 11-year-old hand. He drags me to the basement where my brother and I play checkers. And as I stare at the wall that is a faded hospital blue, my father rapes me for the third time this week. After that, there was just this palpable change that he presented. It was as if he had taken agency of his own voice suddenly for the first time. And if I had to guess, he was probably about 60 years old. And afterwards, he thanked me, and I thanked him. I was like, yo, you changed my life, right? Now, this sounds self-congratulatory and self-aggrandizing, but the point, though, is that I didn't need that training. What I needed were the guidelines that June had set up. What I needed was this safe space and this community that first of all, provided the warmth and tenderness for him to feel like he could share that. But the guidelines led to a certain truth coming out in ways that I just could not comprehend. Since then, I have taught many students legal writing at law school. I have raised 2 boys, And my son turned 17 yesterday, and he's turned out to be a wonderful human being. But honestly, I don't know if I have had a greater impact on him, as great as I feel like I had when I was facilitating a Poetry for the People program. That's what that program means to me, but it's not necessarily because of me or any student teacher poets or what have you. What June created, the foundation that June created, was a powerful medium to make these connections that I could not imagine happening in any other way.
Hola. So, likewise, I've had many of those experiences where the guidelines helped to find a pathway for a student of mine to tell a truth that they had never been able to do so. Many, many times I was pushed my students to find the risk in their work, which for many was very daunting, very scary moment, right? But the guidelines and the community that's created within Poetry for the People provides that space for them to share. And within that shared space, you got everything. You got love and what that was like, you know, the beautiful parts where you're just like, I'm so in love with you. And then the parts where you're like, yeah, you need to go, right? Those parts of love. You had the parts where you had political turmoil that is occurring around you, and you just feel a little bit lost. You don't know where your place is. You thought you did. You're seeing things that are changing at rapid pace, and you have no control over them. And you're writing about these, you know, what you would feel are insurmountable, just almost like shrapnel coming at you, right? And it was always a space where you could share that moment or those feelings in a artistic, creative way that was delineated from the guidelines that June provided. And this was an experiment. It was a complete experiment that we worked through, all of us. And I value that space. When you leave that space, as I've learned now after so many years, decades, that that space was valuable. It was unique. There was nothing like it. There will never be anything like that. And I treasure it. And in those moments, there were times where you had conflict. You did not always get along with the person who's sitting next to you. You did not always get along with what someone even said in their poem. And that was something you had to own, you had to deal with, and you had to critique that in the poem, right? I had to tell students, literally, I don't believe what you wrote. I don't believe what you wrote. And they're like, what? And I'm like, there's more to what you're saying here, and you're not revealing that here. This is the medium for telling the truth. This is for maximum impact, minimal words. There are too many words here getting around the main issue here. Let's center this using the guidelines to help that come out, right? And so one of those moments for me was when I last was with June. And we had, it was February of the last semester, it was the semester that Junichi was teaching in the spring. And we went to a theater piece. I absolutely have no idea what it was because I was so centered on June. June sitting next to me. We made that like a thing. When I saw her in the lobby, I was like, we're sitting together. And so we sat together, and when I left and I hugged her, I knew that was the last hug. And it was a long, you know. And the next week, I had held back in the class, not out of fear or anything like that. I had come back into the space, and I wanted those students to kind of bond first and kind of bring their poems forward. And I felt like they were not going there. So I felt like in that hug from June, I had to go there the next week. So I wrote a poem, and I feel like that's something that needs to be shared here. And the reason why is, it's poetry for the people. You have poems, you share them, and you read them out loud. And for me, this was the conversation I've always had to have with my father in regards to God. We had that conflict. He's an ardent believer, and I am not. And when I presented this poem to the class, as Junichi may or may not remember, it was a little contested. But that was a good thing. And I knew it was gonna happen, and I didn't fear it at that time. And I knew what I was saying was true, and I could defend my artistic decisions, if you will. So I'll share that with you now, quickly. It's a poem for my father who asks me why I don't believe in God. Daddy, the first time someone called me a fag, I was 5. The altar boys made me genuflect on the side of the church, holding a baseball bat up to my chin, wanting to knock a home run out of my skull. Just like in Oakland when Marta, trembling voice, tells her papa she loves Susana, and later that night wakes to him raping her on her bedroom floor, next to the Virgin Mary nightlight, whispers in her ear, if God won't make you a woman, mija, I will. Or in Guatemala, when los soldados find out about Lucha and Sandra, they boot smash through the front door, spear Lucha's brother Jesus, force the lesbianas to eat a soup made of his dick and blood. And the one soldier tells them to finally swallow a man like you swallow communion, bitch. Then for dessert, force rifles up their cunts. Just like in that Georgian parking lot where the drunk men surround Juan, the bartender, last one to leave the club that 4th of July, as the Billy Club God mob flash their head beams. Jesus Jose Maria rolls off his lips as they tie him up, haul him in the back of the black pickup, light firecrackers up his ass, then throw him into the baptizing river just to see if a flaming fag can swim. And Papa, look, here in San Diego, where Lupita's parents kidnap her at night, take her to Mexico so El Padre can exercise her love for Lourdes, ties her shaking hands to the wooden bedposts, makes the sign of the cross with holy water on her sweaty forehead. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned, spills from her lips. In a small, dark, dank confessional of a room, never to leave until she opens her legs for him. Just like in Laramie, Wyoming, how the 2 boys picked a young man up at the bar, take him for a ride down the narrow, desolate freeway, and beat and beat and beat Leviticus into Matthew, crucify him on a rickety wooden fence. The moonlight of a western sky leaves a scarecrow silhouette of a broken boy along the highway like any other warning sign. This is God's country. Or at the military base where they obliterate Adam's skull, no limb, no skin, no rib spared, the pulverizing blows of those God-fearing, good-natured, well-American soldier boys pound his head like a preacher's fist on the Bible. And when his mothers arrive to identify him, the military chaplain's steely eyes glare back at her. Don't ask how they disfigured him. Don't tell how and why they killed him. Or look, Daddy, in North Carolina, the lone gunman enters the gay bar. He unloads the liturgy of his gun, 1 bullet at a time, 1 round at a time. He sprawls a graffiti of brain and blood along the walls, chants over and over, I am a shepherd of the Lord. I am a shepherd of the Lord. Like this very moment across the table from you, Papa, I know you see God as a church, a Holy Spirit, a glorious heaven awaiting. But to me, Papa, God is a gun, a punch, a rape, a bat, a kick, a stick, a fist, and a hell made only for queers like me. So that went over well. We had a raucous debate, almost furious. Many folks took offense as they saw their religion being attacked. And we had that debate, and we had that discussion, and it was raw, and it was, and there were folks who didn't see it being offensive, and they were having that discussion. And I presented the poem to my father, right? I let him know, this is how I feel. And that came from learning from June, not just guidelines, right? They're there for the creative and the poetic composition, but to be able to draw in those to how you feel and what your life is going, like what you are going through in your life and others, that's what that poem was able to do for me, to make that connection. And for those who felt pushed, they had to figure out why they felt pushed, what that struggle was for them. Why couldn't they get past that? And as we were talking about all of this and, well, that's not how my religion is, and, they're going off. I was like, this is the introduction of religion for many people of color, especially this particular Christian religion that I grew up in. This is a long historical aspect that's a part of the guidelines as well. How does this fit into the greater, body of works that we have, right? And the historical context that we're in. And so after all that, right, it's heated. We walk out of that room and we have dinner. We have dinner. We go to the Thai restaurant. We eat, we talk pop culture probably, and all these kinds of things. And there's one student in particular, still a little bit quiet. And then later, as we're leaving, comes to me and says, you know what, I have a lot of thinking to do. And I was like, yeah, we all do, right? But that came from that space. And that's what that space is to me, is poems, right? But then it's the conversation after, and the adding to the literary canon in that context, right? To American letters, but it's also I had that conversation with my dad. I had that conversation with the people in the room, so that's how I would answer that.
Thank you, Marcos. What did you refer to me as earlier? A shooter? No. You said I'm a gunner? Oh, okay. So as the gunner, I took the prompt very seriously, and so I wrote something down, and forgive me, I'm just going to read what I wrote, but I tried to answer it just as you had asked it. What has poetry for the people meant to you, and what does it continue to mean? Poetry for the people in many ways gave me lasting relationships. One of my best friends, Sam Liapas, who's here today, I met because she was a student of mine in the small P4P workshop that I co-facilitated with Alegria Berkeley in 1995. I remember that she came to my house on Hillegas Street, and I was struck by the power of her words. Working as a student teacher poet, I remember being very serious about the poetry guidelines. And if anyone deviated, I was at best concerned, and at worst, pardon my French, I'd lose my shit. But Alegria, on the other hand, was soft-spoken and graceful, not to mention a very talented poet. So in this environment, the students had the spectrum of teaching styles from which to be challenged and or inspired. So poetry for me has meant friendship, deep, deep friendship. This is what poetry for the people has to offer us all, I think, a state of mutual trust and support between allies as we build together. Poetry for the people meant introductions too. When I attended NYU as a graduate in poetry, a program that I'm sure I got into because of June, I worked with an organization called WIL, Women in Literature and Letters, And this collective focused on ways women of color could use their art and connections to support each other. And I still have a card that June wrote introducing me to Cornelius Eady when I moved to New York City. I didn't end up using it because Cornelius didn't end up teaching that term, but I still have the card, almost like a love letter. So if I ever run into Cornelius, I might just give it to him as evidence of our formal introduction and connection. I also worked for many years with the late Lauren Muller at City College. Lauren ran the Poetry for the People program there, and she recruited me to teach at City College in the summer of 2008. So Poetry of the People has also given me a way to earn an honest living. After rereading Places of Rage, a conversation with Pratibha Parmar and Angela Davis in the beautiful book that I am lucky to be a part of, The Unruly Witness, I was struck by their recollection of meeting up with June in Paris in the 80s and how in the rain they were three black women could not get a ride back to their hotel. And how the next morning June greeted them with a pitcher of water and a fresh new poem. How the poem acknowledged the reality of racism still on display on the slick city streets of one of the most famous cities in the world, but took their experience and transmuted it into a collective beauty and strength and tribute to their newfound friendship. So Poetry for the People has gifted me my life and it is telling me now in this room that I need to be cultivating and collaborating with all the poets I know and the ones I have yet to meet during these particularly brutal and consequential times. I'm gonna end with a poem that I wrote thinking of my friend Samantha Liapas. It's called Matter. It matters that the young ones slept on the steps all night to keep the school open, reached for each other's cold, numb hands for the first time, heat rising in their hungry stomachs. Someone runs to get burritos and through barricades and the din of sirens doesn't return. Nothing and everything matters when the matter is money. Their bodies, money, their bodies, debt. I owe everything to the stars and the moss-covered rocks outside the main library, I overheard one of them say once in a poem never written down. So never burned in a pyre started by a group that was paid $10 an hour and promised Subway sandwiches. In the fourth book on forgiveness, the young lovers are exhausted, their salty bodies swollen and resting, their bright eyes closed as if to say, please do not call this theater. Please remember all our lives together are a body ablaze.
First of all, I just want to say it's an honor to be up here, and the stories are really lovely and powerful. Really, really. It's been an incredible week. How many people were at the event on Tuesday? Yeah. How many people were at the event yesterday? Yeah, it's been really incredible. So what does Poetry for the People mean to me? I guess one of the things I want to say about it is, as was mentioned in my bio, I organize with the Movement for Black Lives. And in 2024 in Atlanta, one of the leaders talked about one of the goals of our movement is to capture infrastructure to serve the needs of our people. And yesterday, Dr. Lee Rayford at BAMFA talked about the conversation between June Jordan and Angela Davis and how Davis sort of came to accept that June Jordan wasn't going to be political in the same way, that it was really her politics coming through her poetry. But see, I think that in addition to the brilliant politics that came through her poetry, the other intervention that she created through Poetry for the People was about capturing infrastructure. Because a key part of why she landed in Black Studies is because Black Studies is also a captured infrastructure. Any of us can go read a book or write a poem or get some friends together to like read poems to each other and critique them in our kitchen. But see, Poetry for the People got folks together to write really revolutionary poetry and got the government to pay for it. And that is really, really radical shit. And it's key because capturing infrastructure was part of what made it so powerful, and that combination of her and everything that she brought to the table in the context of this captured infrastructure at UC Berkeley, and the young folks who came to Berkeley for the promise of radicalism and instead got kind of a corporatized university and were kind of betrayed and disillusioned, could actually find what they had been looking for at P4P. And then she went on to make it an American cultures class so that students who weren't even looking for that, or shall we say, did not know they were looking for that, could find it as well. So captured infrastructure was a really, really key piece of what made P4P so powerful. And the thing for me, and so that is kind of like the impact that it had in the culture, the nation, the world. The key thing for me about P4P that it meant to me personally was this profound opportunity to develop and exercise my own leadership. Because I was the program's third director after June, and I want to begin by saying I didn't know June. I mean, we had read at some places together, and I had met her in passing, but I'm sitting here with people who had really profound and close relationships with her on the panel and in the audience. We read at a few events together. Maria Poblet said she had heard my work and liked it, and hopefully she would be pleased with some of the things that I did in her legacy. But I came in as an outsider, and that was 20 years ago in 2006. And in some ways, I was really not the obvious choice for the job. I hadn't been part of the program. I didn't have an MFA. I didn't have a poetry book out. And I was nowhere near the most accomplished poet who applied for the job. But I think that the department accurately assessed that the program needed something different than the usual academic leadership, because there was a huge amount of conflict in the program. And, in some cases, people were lashing out at each other, and the student teachers had basically run the last director out of the program. And when I came in, I very quickly realized that I hadn't come into an academic program that needed a new instructor. And Elizabeth said it last night. June did reparenting. So I came into a family that had lost its matriarch and was in deep, deep grief. And that did not require the usual academic skill set. So I taught at Stanford and the Institute for Diversity in the Arts, and I had some poetic accomplishments, but I also had a background in community mental health, youth leadership, young adult development. I had run an alcohol and drug program for teens in the East Bay. I had worked as the wellness coordinator at Youth Speaks. I had worked with the Harm Reduction Coalition. I had worked with Generation 5, which had a vision to end child sexual abuse. They had a 125-year plan. I had done community organizing in Black neighborhoods, and I had done programming in continuation and juvenile hall schools. And I had this whole skill set for addressing trauma and conflict in communities of color, and I ended up leaning on that pretty heavily. And I think my biggest innovation in the program was to turn it into a trauma-informed classroom, right? And I think folks have really testified that part of what the guidelines did was elicit these heavy truths from people that they hadn't told other places and certainly hadn't written poems about. And just that level of truth-telling was incredibly, incredibly powerful. I think for people today, it's hard to understand the mental health context of that time and the one that June Jordan came out of. She was in a generation where people had lots of trauma and you were just supposed to suffer in silence. You held it together unless you broke down so bad that you got locked up. And basically you were supposed to come up with a couple of addictions and compulsions that could numb you out and just keep it pushing. That was how they did it. And June was someone who blew all that up by talking much more openly about her traumatic experiences, domestic violence, sexual violence. She was part of the generation of feminists who broke down those walls. But writing poetry about your trauma, while it's definitely cathartic and powerful, is not the same as engaging in a process of therapy or somatic healing, the things that we know today, right? And that are available today in culturally competent ways, which they were not in the 90s. And so June created this community of trust, and she gave people a space to put voice to their trauma, and it absolutely changed people's lives. You know, she said good poems can interdict a suicide, but when it comes to mental health and trauma healing, having a community and writing poems can't be the only tools in our toolbox. So when I came along 20 years ago, I believed that my biggest innovation in P4P was making it a trauma-informed program, teaching about trauma, the politics of trauma, and offering tools to address trauma if it came up while people were writing. Because the program didn't need a lot of academic innovation. As people are testifying, the guidelines were brilliant, they're genius. And what the program did need some of was innovation in creating a more trauma-informed culture. And Kelly said it in her poem quoted in Adrienne's show, Call Me June. You know, June Jordan broke down all the hierarchies. She threw out the canon and she said, my students' poems are as important or more important than these dead white men, right? She broke down the hierarchy between herself and the students and the student teachers. She just blew it up. In some ways, she reparented, and like so many queer folks, she created chosen family, and she opened her heart to her students, and it was a deep mutual connection, which was amazing, right? People were allowed in the program a much greater level of power and connection and community with each other than in most parts of the university. But part of what happened when she blew up all those barriers was that she also blew up the boundaries. And we know today that boundaries are really important when there are power imbalances and when professors are in a mentor position. So when she did more than mentoring, she created family, and we know about family. Family has love, and sometimes it also has dysfunction, right? So I didn't know June, but in running this program for 20 years, I've heard many stories from former students and student teachers. And if they are to be believed, you know, June sometimes got drunk with her students, you know. Sometimes she tried to set up her students on dates with each other, right? Sometimes she showed pretty clear favoritism, as parents often do in families. And I believe that the positive intent was that she treated students like friends and family in a way that was about valuing them as humans, and that was a very powerful intervention in hierarchy. But I think that there was also a downside. So my intervention was that I came into the program and set a lot of boundaries. No underage drinking, no getting drunk at P4P events, no romantic or sexual relationships between student teachers and students. STPs should not be trying to function as therapists and crisis counselors when their students disclose trauma and get really triggered. And being really intentional about social relationships with students and student teachers when they're in a position of power and are grading them. And, you know, I also made a ton of mistakes when I came in, which is, you know, what happens when you're leading. But I learned a lot about how to hold a community with humility and also to lead with principles and hold lines that were hard for people. But I think it ultimately led us out of the conflict and helped stabilize the program. And you know, one thing I do want to say that I'm also really pleased about in my tenure was that in 2024, we expanded to include a prose course that, according to former STP Ananda Esteva, had been planned between June and Alice Walker, called Fiction for the Folks. And June had passed before the course could happen. It was supposed to be poetry for the people and fiction for the folks. And that course finally became a reality. And in that class, students are are writing a whole novel in the semester. And if I get, and when we talk about the future, I'll talk a little bit more about the story of how and why the university shut down the program, shut down Poetry for the People in 2020, and the lessons that I've learned from that.
I really want to thank all of you. It was just so moving to listen to each and every different dimension of things going on. So thank you so much. And the next topic that we're going to talk about is the future of Poetry for the People. And so I'm looking forward to hearing each of you again. Yes.
I'm going to cheat by answering your question about the future by sharing a story about the past. This is basically an unwritten essay that I've been working on now for 25 years. And it's the first time that I think I'm actually articulating some part of it in a public forum. I talked about how as I was saying, like, I don't know if I'm the one who really should be doing this. Like, yeah, I felt that as a student teacher poet. I was an econ major, right? Like, it's like, what am I doing as an econ major doing this? And then I was a law student. I graduated from Berkeley, and June invited me to come back and give a lecture on rhythm and rhyme. There are two distinct things I remember about that. Number one, Michelle Ndegeocello was in the audience. And I'm like, why am I lecturing to Michelle Ndegeocello about rhythm and rhyme? This is ridiculous. And the second thing I remember is that for whatever reason, I was inspired to bring an accordion as part of that lecture. Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, June, by the way, was a very big proponent of this idea that we should have P for P babies. My wife, Dima Hilal, is a former student teacher poet. June did not set us up, but the first time that I think we were in a room together was that lecture when I was holding an accordion, telling Michelle Ndegeocello how to do rhythm. So somehow from that, June and I would continue to have discussions about the future of the program. And then when I was working as a corporate lawyer in San Francisco, I got a call and she wanted to meet. And essentially she asked me to direct the program. And I felt as that was as ridiculous of a request as it was for me to go into Glide Memorial Church, and moderate this panel. But she was very adamant about it, and I was not going to say no to June. My entire legal career, I suppose, on some level, was derailed because of that. But of course, I'm very grateful to her for that. The specific story I want to share. And you have to keep in mind the context here. 9/11 was September 11th, 2001. She'd asked me to direct the class about the same time. Okay, so this is, some people remember that as like a unifying moment in this country. I think for many of us, we remember that as a very frightening time where dissent was not okay, right? And so I wanted to use that and make that a part of the syllabus. We always chose 3 traditions, so it made perfect sense to me to use African American poetry, especially focusing on the civil rights movement and taking lessons from that. I wanted to focus on Arab American poetry, I think for fairly obvious reasons, and I wanted to focus on Asian American poetry with an emphasis on South Asian poetry because we had already started to see lots of hate crimes happen. And I wrote this introduction for the reader and for the syllabus, and I think the way that I framed it was that I wanted to show these connections of dissent, of people who had resisted essentially the American government and were presenting themselves as voices of resistance. And I think I, at some point, used the word un-American. And I thought June would be excited about it. We met, and essentially what she very much wanted to convey to me was that, look, all the poems, the traditions, great, right? They do not get to claim the flag. They do not get to claim America or patriotism. Like, this tradition of poetry in the civil rights movement or what have you, that is American. So you cannot frame this as being in any way un-American. And that for me was an incredibly powerful lesson to remember going forward. I think about that all the time because obviously in this day and age, it's very easy to want to channel all your frustrations and rage in ways that other people are going to label un-American, and maybe you might yourself want to sort of embrace that, but I think what June would say is like, no, we are not giving that up. No one gets to claim that. If you are voicing, dissent today, that is as American as you can be. Like, claim that. Like, that is patriotism. That's one part of my wish. The other thing that you should know is that we had, and this is while June was sick. She was very much in battling breast cancer. I was in complete denial of the fact that she was losing this battle. I thought of myself as a substitute teacher, that I'm just in there temporarily until June comes back. But during this time, during 9/11, during these very serious discussions and having serious planning sessions about the future of this program and essentially continuing her legacy, the thing that I want everyone here to know, the first meeting we had was Maria Poblet, June, and myself. I think we also met at a Thai restaurant. And we're talking about all these various serious things. And at some point, when it came time to order, June said, hey, should we be ordering the beef? Like, there's this mad cow disease. This tells you at the time. This, have you read about that? Like, what should we do? And I didn't have any intellectual or informed thought to say in response. What I did tell her was the most outrageous dad joke I had ever known. So I said to her, June, there are two cows lying in a field, and one cow says to the other, hey, have you heard about this mad cow disease? Are you worried about that? And the other cow responds, mad cow disease? What? Why would I care? I'm a helicopter. It's a stupid joke, I know. June could not keep it together for the next 10, 15 minutes. She was laughing hysterically, and she kept trying to repeat and tell the joke herself and could not do it. We got nothing done for the rest of that meeting because she was laughing hysterically. And at some point, somebody came up to us and said, I know you're having a good time, but if you could keep it down just a little, and we're like, okay. We met 2 more times after that, and I swear to you, each time we met, somebody came up to us and it's like, I know you're having a good time, but if you could keep your voice down, whatnot. And I wanted to share that, as sort of ridiculous and silly as it is, because June was very serious about having a good time. It is easy, especially during times like this, to just be buried in all these emotions that just sucks the joy out of life. But if you do not figure out a way to inject that joy into what it is that you're doing, then as far as I'm concerned, you are not continuing the true tradition of what June would want. That's my hope for the future.
And yes, June did like having a good time. And I liked having them with her. But the other thing June was really good at and did lots of was logistics. And like Junichi, I did not come into Poetry for the People knowing what Poetry for the People was. I was a civil engineering student in McLaughlin Hall. Yes, I was. Yes, I was. And doing experiments on LeConte in my physics, right? And I went to a reading with someone who I was dating at the time, and the students of the second cohort, I should say, of Poetry for the People absolutely mesmerized me and wooed me, and specifically Samia Bashir. And I was like, I'm gonna take that class. I'm gonna have to fit it in, right? In between all of the math analysis, blah, 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 right? And little did I know, I ended up changing my major. I was in literature. I was in classes with Alegría in English, and just very even-brained person as I am. This question popped the left brain in me, the logistics. And I would like the future of Poetry for the People to return back to campus. And I would like to see it developed in such a way that we do protect those particular attributes that are necessary to abide by union protocols and whatnot. However, I would also like to say that we need to reimagine the way in which we encompass the program as a whole. So, for example, as coming from those lovely STEM labs, Poetry for the People is a lab. It is a humanities lab. I took molecular cell biology, and then I had a lab. Poetry for the People is that. No one questions STEM. No one asks or says, oh, why do you need this money for X, Y, or Z? Well, you know what? This reader and these poems are the flasks and are the microscopes that you need. They are the tools that are necessary for this humanities lab. And to be serious about that, right? And no one questions the time spent in a lab, right? That work is there to be attributed with the, as they're matriculated in the course, to get their 4 units. Additionally, to have those labs, those humanities labs, count for an education minor. There should be an education minor tied to Poetry for the People. I learned how to teach in Poetry for the People. I know how to teach from this program. I have never walked into a classroom and questioned my ability to teach, ever. Everything that has been thrown at me was thrown at me through Poetry for the People, either through the academic setting of going up to Foothill or going to the units, or going out to Glide Memorial, Berkeley High, Oakland Unified, Dublin's Women's Prison. We went to a elementary school, little 6 to 8-year-olds, and to talk to them, not condescendingly, but to have them write their poems and to respect their viewpoint. And I think that's something, I'd like to have that conversation with folks here, as folks who are not only who went through Poetry for the People, but are looking for the future of Poetry for the People, and that we reimagine this and how we, as Aya has said, make the state pay for the radicalism that we have within us. But it's not just, it's sad that you have to call the truth radical, but we know we have to when we have officials telling us no one was shot in the face. So we have to, roll the sleeves up, and we have to do the work. And we're not all gonna agree. That's a given. We didn't agree with my poem, right, when I was in that class. But we have to come to the table to be imaginative enough to have a director, have STPs, Go out into the community and do the work. That has to happen. It cannot just, well, we just don't know how, we can't do that. You know, the university has this requirement and that requirement, and I know it does. They had requirements in the past. We have to find the way, whether it is through imaginative wording, as June used to say, and we have to get serious about the development part of it as well. Do the research. Who has those arts grants that we can pull from? Who has education grants that we can pull from? And we need to have that coalition come together sooner than later, I would say. That's my left brain working, right, for the future, like of Poetry for the People. The art side, the one that got wooed, what I hope for the future of Poetry for the People is poems. More poems. June, whether you want to know it or not, there's a part of June's vision for Poetry for the People that's unsaid, and that is the contribution to American letters. There is Ruth Foreman sitting here with us. She has contributed manifold to American letters. Samia Bashir as well, right? My student, Solmaz Sharif, who is in the English department here as well, she has contributed. June knew that everyone wasn't going to be a quote unquote published poet, right? But that is a contribution. I am sitting next to Xochi, who has her contribution to American letters as well, right? That's another part of it, the contribution that we have. And these folks take Poetry for the People to their institutions, and then they grow from there. Then another one goes to another institution, and they grow from there. And they've learned from the incubation here at UC Berkeley on how to compose that. So I don't want to talk too much, but that's what I wish for.
I'm going to read again. I'm sorry, guys. But it's fast, because that's okay. Okay, so what I imagine. What I imagine for the future of Poetry for the People at UC Berkeley is for the regents, the chancellor, administrators to provide the literal space, time, and funding for the program to work its magic. Poetry for the People is a dance. You work alone with your heart open, scribbling in a notebook. You read another published poet, and suddenly there are two of you. I remember reading Hasim Rueh, Liang Li, Naomi Shinab Nye, and Marilyn Chin in this intimate way. And then you meet in seminar with 10 poets with whom you conceive of the prompts and the projects for the year. That time, you use that time so that it is of our time. And then in the spring, 100 fellow student poets can come together in a hall listening to a lecture by someone who tunes their bodies to the craft of building poems into great cities of human possibility. And then you subdivide. June always said, now let's subdivide into our small groups. That ritual, that dance of 1 to 2 to 10 to 100 back to 10 heart warriors creates an ecosystem of healing and heralding. It is a secular prayer that keeps us going internally as well as out into the world at large. If I had to describe the program in one word, it is polyphonic. Multiple independent melodic lines played simultaneously, creating a complex interwoven texture where different voices operate independently yet harmonize. It is that sudden breath you take when you come across something so moving, all the parts of your body stand at attention, ready and willing. Another way to put it is Poetry for the People is, in my estimation, an example of mycology, the study of mushrooms and their ecosystems. Mushrooms break things down and build things up in a dance of biodiversity and symbiosis. There is no waste. It is a counterweight to the dog-eat-dog mentality where pollution and destruction proliferates. P for P is powerful because it embodies a strength in numbers paradigm. For example, there are 800 billionaires in the world. And guess what? There are 8.3 billion non-billionaires in the world. I don't know about you, but if I wanted to make something really spectacular on a large scale, I'd want the 8.3 billion on my team. Or to put it another way, Zoran Mandani recently hired and paid people $40 an hour to clear the snow on walkways in New York City. And guess what? The snow was cleared in a day. He took taxpayer dollars and actually used them for the common good. This is an example of strength in numbers and what June has always envisioned. Space for contemplation and action are at the center of Poetry for the People and our program. So we need the space, we need the time, and the lead teacher, and I promise you the program will not only take care of itself, it will take care of us all, for from their ranks will come so many eyes with the plan to conceive and construct a humane world where we place joy and children and imagination at the center of all of our undertakings. And considering now that so many of us are under threat of attack by this administration, if you so much as claim to care about others' well-being, I would like to propose that we build structures without individual names at the center of them, much the same way Pablo Neruda's poems were recited by children in the streets of Santiago, Chile, and they did not even know who the author was. We need now more than ever to assume the mantle of we the people of the world, we the 8.3 billion hearts. I don't know about you, but I want to stand together and here in the distance and in the streets and on the ocean waves and as high up in the sky, we are the ones that we have been waiting for.
Shay. One of the things that I want to tell tonight is, the story of what happened, right? What happened when the university came and shut down people. So what happened is that there were some STEM departments that were illegally using undergrad student instructors in a category of instruction that was clearly designated for GSIs who were union. And those undergraduates who they had teaching courses and tutoring were either getting paid less because UGSI wages are less than GSI wages, or in some cases were not getting paid at all and were only getting course credit. And because this was a clear illegal labor violation, the GSIs went to the United Auto Workers, and the United Auto Workers pushed back on their behalf, and the university had to pay $5 million. And after that went down, the university was like, well, we're gonna look across the campus and see where are the places where undergraduates are doing peer teaching, and we're gonna shut it down. And it did not matter that Poetry for the People had been around for 30 years, was a national model. Nobody was being exploited, feeling exploited, actually quite the opposite. Undergrads were getting professional development opportunities that are usually denied to them at that level of education. So, and the department, we worked, we tried, we fought, but one of the things that happened is it all went down in 2020. And back in the day, when Poetry for the People was threatened, June Jordan would go chain herself to something, right? And fight, and and fire up the students and the student teachers to fight. But we were in this global pandemic, and there was no office to go chain yourself to. There was no place to show up to, and there was no mechanism to get the people to go anywhere to stage that kind of fight. We tried, the department backed me, we had plans, we did it, but we couldn't make it work at that time. And so one of the things that was a lesson for me is it shows that one of the problems with capturing infrastructure is that now you're part of a larger system that is not aligned with your values. And any talk that the university or anybody has is like, oh, it was a labor issue. It was not a labor issue. Some of us have been in an environment where, for example, sexual harassment happens, and then they're like I was at a middle school once where there had been some complaints of sexual harassment, and then they came and had the new rule that nobody could hug anybody, right? Because sexual harassment. No, y'all, we know the difference between hugging someone and sexual harassment. That's the same thing here. Cracking down on peer teaching is lazy and bullshit. This is about the corporatization of the university that is more interested in closing any possibility of being litigated against as a kind of a paper-pushing approach than being concerned about labor, right? Which is why we need unions and why the unions are always fighting. So I think that's really important. And I think there are big lessons here in this particular time. We need to build structures of mutual aid, including artistic and cultural mutual aid, that are not sustained by the state and the nonprofit industrial complex. And I think another big lesson is when I came into the program, I waded into this big conflict and it was a rupture with the STPs, so we lost our lineage. We never healed those rifts. And I made some overtures over the years, and I had some side conversations with people, and it was either a situation where, I reached out to some people and they just didn't want to respond, or sometimes we'd chat, but neither of us ever followed up. And I also never took on the task of organizing any healing or transformative justice circles in the P4P community. So in 2020, when the university came for the program, the pandemic and all the corporatization, but we were fractured. And we didn't have any capacity to mount a strong resistance as a community, and I think that was a major loss. And I think it's a lesson for these times to know, and it's like you said, Marcos, we may have disagreements. We need to know who we're in coalition with, even if we have differences, and being able to discern that, the people we have shared interests, but conflict from our actual enemies. And what I'm excited about, hearing you talk about logistics, Marcos, hearing you talk, Xochi, about visioning, I think we need to consider that it's time for a project of recapturing infrastructure. And see, here's the other thing that was critical. Part of how June Jordan captured the infrastructure in the first place was by being June Jordan. She was a literary superstar, and her stardom held down a whole lot of things for the program. And when she passed, we could not replicate that engine for the program. And so I'm really excited about possibilities of recapturing infrastructure that has a more collective model of power. And so we may need to come together and figure out what needs to happen to reignite poetry for the people. And I feel like we've had support from the department very consistently. And I know that there's so much brilliance and care for the program out in the community. So let's talk, y'all, because I think that this opportunity to remember June Jordan and to remember her legacy is also really a call for us to figure out what is the next step in preserving her legacy. Ashe.
Thank you again, everybody. So right now we have a QR code up there, and in the time that is left, if everyone could just, if you feel like it, just write some words up there. They'll be projected actually up there. And what about the future of PFP? Not only when we think about it, but also what about the future? Oh yeah, and in the meantime, we can have a conversation. If anyone has comments or questions, right now is a good time to. There we have someone who would like to speak.
Hi. Thank you for this wonderful offering. As someone who didn't even plan on coming here, and thank you, Professor Jones, for the yes, for the pressure to be here. But just this entire week, being quite humbled and almost intimidated, actually, by the kind of intensity of the relations and the power of this process and this project that I'm just now learning about this week. So grateful again, and thank you for that. I think just in the spirit of this kind of question about the future of this project, having very little institutional knowledge about it, but being here I'm a grad student in the geography department, second year, and I am thinking a lot about geography. So much of how you guys talked about Berkeley or the Bay Area represented a particular moment in this particular place. And so as you imagine the future of a project like this, I want to kind of think through, even from 2020 to now, that the kind of spatial conditions of the Bay Area have transformed, continue to transform, and represent a kind of territorial mandate that might make a project like this look very different than it once did. And so I guess the question that I'm asking is, as we confront the kind of demographic realities, as we confront the questions of, mass, deracination that's caused by, gentrification and this movement of people far to Stockton and to Antioch and all these things that was once, a very vibrant part. You guys keep mentioning these places that you guys would go, but those very places don't look the same that they did. And so how do you kind of deal with that, and what do you feel like poetry can do to kind of think through the kind of challenge, the very different spatial configuration that the Bay Area is posing to us?
Well, I'll start. We have a blueprint for Poetry for the People, in which you can attribute Poetry for the People in wherever you are, right? Even if you've never studied under June. But the other thing is that, to me, clearly the evolution would go where the people are. So if there is an academic component to Poetry for the People in the future, there's nothing to stop it from being at UC Merced. There's nothing to stop it from going to UC Davis or any state school or any community college. In fact, we have a representative of a Poetry for the People from across the bay in San Francisco. So I feel that you need to take the energy that you have for Poetry for the People and instill it where you're at. And it will be its own creation where it's at. I grew up here in the Bay Area, and to take a kind of sidetrack here, I grew up in the Bay Area during, the 70s and 80s. My parents definitely took me to quite a few rallies and quite a few marches. I remember being, if there wasn't a babysitter, my mom was like, well, we'll just leave them with one of the Panthers, and they would take care of me, or we'll just go to the commune and they'll take care of me. Somebody's gonna, in that group is gonna happen. Today, when I tell people my mom dropped me off with strangers, they're like, are you insane? Their mom is insane. But that's what we did. And the times they do change, right? June was born in the Depression. She was born in 1936. And I related to June in the 1990s. And she grew up in Harlem. I grew up in Richmond, California. Completely different environments, right? Different everything. But she brought herself here to California with everything that she had from the East Coast. And one of the first things that she noticed when she got to campus was, I have to change. I have to change my curriculum. I have to change everything that's in front of me, because my students are different. They're not the students I've encountered in New York, right? And I have to, that's my duty as a teacher. And the geography mandated that, and it will mandate it continually. the environment will do that. The other thing she mentioned was the sky. She had never really noticed the sky before until she got to the West Coast. So, yay. But that will always have its component, and we definitely need to not be blind to that as well. But we have to do the work of finding those communities, and we have to support them in this. I don't mean to hog the time, but that's kind of how I would answer that, if that's okay to your, yeah.
Thank you.
I'll be super brief. Not a question, just a thank you. My name is Dr. Cesar Cruz. I started on this campus in 1991, and I'm one of the early cohorts of P4P. I met my wife here. We did have a P4P baby. My son just started on campus here last semester as an 18-year-old. And he'll be here in a little bit. He's coming from class. He needs to know who birthed him, right? I'm just feeling really grateful to June Jordan. I turned 52 today. I didn't think I'd make it to 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 because I run an organization in Oakland called Homies Empowerment, and we unfortunately have had to bury a lot of young people. But this is the best way that I could spend my birthday, honoring June Jordan, thanking her through you, and you'll see the P4P baby soon.
Woo! Happy birthday to you. Thank you for being here. Would you like to? Sure.
All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. This was really a beautiful conversation. I know most of you, Tamina Khan. Oh, Tamina Khan, Berkeley alumni and current lecturer in college writing programs and Poetry for the People instructor at City College, where we have an older and intertwined history with Poetry for the People at UC Berkeley, from 1975 until now. So I guess what I'm hearing from you, and I want to, and coming from the last question as well, is how now do we reimagine Poetry for the People in this more decentralized movement, which includes us at City College and us at UC Berkeley. I have a foot in on both sides of the bay, and in the communities and the other community colleges, beyond the academic institutions, the schools, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know that we even have an answer to this question, but I think where do we I would like to find ways continue the conversation, so that we're not doing our little thing at CCSF independently of how things are developing at Berkeley, but we're aligned and intertwined. Yeah.
So thank you so much. Adrienne, did you want to say something? Okay. We're actually going to go over, but we're going to, Adrienne's going to be the last comment.
Yes to everything that's been said. And I'm looking at the words up there: yes to community, yes to love, yes to power, yes to truth, yes to friendship, yes to addressing trauma in the process. The only word I want to see up there is poetry. Because all of that, while true and real to the experience, is encountered in the pursuit of writing well-crafted, poetically informed poetry. And all of this other stuff needs to be addressed along the way. But one thing June was really clear about was that this was about writing powerful, truthful, beautifully crafted poetry. And it could be a sonnet or it could be free verse, but whoever was writing it knew what they were writing. So thank you for letting me say that.
Thank you, Adrienne. So thank you, everyone here. Thank you, everyone who came tonight. And it's just a very beautiful community. And this is we had 3 days of wonderful programming, but it doesn't end here. And I'm looking around seeing, the elements of let's have a meeting and where are we going from here, okay? So, thank you so much, everyone. And we hope to see you back here again. Bye-bye now. Thank you.